welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck, your host. Our special guest is the one and only Joanna Bogle, who's an author of a new book we want to talk about, Saints and Patrons, Christian Names for Baptism and Confirmation. And of course, we also want to talk to Joanna about all her wonderful work here at EWTN. How are you doing?
I'm enjoying life very much.
Yeah,
yes.
You were on with Father Mitch back a few months ago,
yes.
When you were here actually at the time taping your new series, or new episodes anyway, right?
That's right, and great fun as always. And the new series, which will be somewhere ahead yet, but we're working on it, which is not just the calendar of the church's life, but the calendar of our lives, baptism, confirmation, and so on. Yeah, it was fun. Usual messy stuff with cooking, the usual mild adventures behind the scenes, but yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Let me ask you, how much you put a couple of books together, you've done several versions of the series, multiple episodes. How much research do you have to spend before you put a show together?
Well,
like
it's
that?
sort of ongoing, really, because this is, I'm very lucky. It's a hobby, and it's also something that I sort of do for work. And I think a lot of Catholic women, we do like to research the saints and the feast days and the recipes. Almost unconsciously, you say, oh, I found something fun to do, obviously for Christmas and Easter. So in a sense, I'm only doing professionally, if I can put it as pompously as that, what a lot of us might do anyway. And for example, well, for something like confirmation, people say, oh, I'm wondering what to do. And I found myself thinking, yes, that's true. We all wonder what to do for this special occasion. So I'm doing it professionally, and I pick up ideas from friends and family. I mean, I just do find it all great fun.
Well, that's interesting too, because in this, and I called it a book, it probably is more like almost like a booklet, but it's a mini book, I guess you'd call it, right? And it's published by the Catholic True Society, right?
Yes, that's right. They're our main Catholic publishing company in Britain. They've been going for, 150 to 170 years, something like that.
Right, exactly. Now, I was listening to what you were saying about the importance of that event, confirmation, a big event, and we should have something. But you have the Saints and Patrons, Christian Names for Baptism and Confirmation. Is part of the problem, even in this little book, going through the idea that people don't treat it like it's that important anymore?
I think there is a perception that a name is something that sounds nice, and there are two issues here. There's baptism and there's confirmation. And for baptism, priests are often worried that the people want to call their child after a name that's very popular because of television. Classically, a soap opera, think Kylie, think Britney and all of that. And that would be all right, but you must have a Christian name as well. So perhaps a Christian name could be the second name. But sometimes people don't even think about a Christian name, and they come up with something that is sort of absurd. So there's a real problem with that. And there is, I think, a perception that Christian names are boring. Sort of John, Mary, and then ones that classic, Bernadette, Therese. Right. Yeah, but that feels dull. And I wanted to show it doesn't have to be this way. Saints' names are beautiful and exciting and interesting. And you can combine it with a family name that is not specifically Christian, but where you wish to include. There's no reason why you can't do that. But that should be the second name. We must have a saint's name. We are Christians. We're not orphans culturally, and we must have this glorious heritage. And then for confirmation, it's an even bigger thing, because it's usually the sacrament is conferred when children are entering their teens, and they're either blank, I can't think of anything, or they are interested, but they don't know where to start. And pious kid will start Googling saints' names on the internet, and I encourage them to do that when I talk at confirmation groups. But why not have a little booklet? Why not have it at your fingertips?
Well, one of the things that struck me, I'm thinking about the idea, if somebody shows up now for a baptism and either doesn't have a Christian first name or a Christian baptismal name, is that an issue anymore, or is there assumption? And even looking at this book, one of the things you point out is that there's these wonderful, panoply of different names from all over the spectrum, that you've got the idea of so many of these have derivations: Dorothy, Dorothea, Dora. Carola, Caroline, Carolyn, Charlotte. That almost every name somehow you could tie back in some way.
Well, you can, and I think this is where priests need to be large-minded about this. Yes, for example, Carola, Caroline, these are all variants of Charles, and there are one thinks of Charles Borromeo, and Karol Wojtyła, was named after that. So in fact, you can choose your saint, and yes, to some extent, you can stretch it a bit. And I think we need to be large-minded. If I can give a very obvious example of that, Marilyn became popular because of Marilyn Monroe in the 50s. But the name is clearly linked with Mary. It's clearly essentially a derivation of Mary. So I think we can sort of stretch things like that. What is really impossible is if it's absolutely not something that has any Christian connotation at all, Kylie. Well, if you want to call her Kylie as a family nickname, but you must have a saint's name. You're baptizing this child into the, this is to do with the city of God. So I think priests need to think along large lines, and it's not quite fair to say Carola will not be acceptable. It's got to be Caroline, just because that's the more classic. No, it's quite fun to choose something. And I'm quite keen on the idea that one could choose the original name. For example, Claire is a lovely name. One of my best friends is Claire. But the original version of Claire was Chiara, because she was in a... So why not call the child Chiara if you want something a little bit different? I just wanted to help people to think along larger lines so they didn't feel there was just sort of 6 names to choose from.
And that was the founder of Focolare's first name was Chiara. Right?
That's right. And she was clearly named, exactly, and that's how lovely. And she was clearly named after Claire of Assisi, Chiara of Assisi. But a new child might well be also echoing Chiara Lubridge. So in fact, we're making new saints all the time. And the thing I also noticed, actually for confirmation, which in its way is really quite nice, I'd say to teenagers in a confirmation class, okay, what name are you choosing? Sometimes priests ask me to come and give a talk about saints, you see, to explain. And quite often, when they answer up, and of course they all look embarrassed, they don't want to admit, don't like to put their hands up. But when you do get talking, quite often they're choosing a name because it's their granddad or an uncle they love or something. Well, I think that's really nice. I think that kind of sense of tradition is important. And of course that is all bound up with choosing a saint's name. Often it will be a saint's name. But I explain to them there's nothing wrong in choosing your granddad's name. If you love your granddad, that's marvellous. That's terrific. It's much better than a soap opera name or a silly name connected with a football team, because that's so lightweight. It doesn't really carry any spiritual strength. Although, if the footballer had a Christian name, we could do something with that too. But I think this whole idea, you are called by name, and this is all much bigger than we know.
Yeah, you say that. A baptismal name is important because God knows each of us by name. That is our uniqueness as persons.
Yes, I think this is very important. And I've only come to think about this recently because, of course, we think and talk about this a lot as Catholics, the value of the human person, particularly because they can be killed if they're old and frail in an old people's home these days. Dreadful things happen in hospitals, and of course in the womb, killed by abortion in a most dreadful way. So it's made us focus on the value of the human person, that each individual, and we have a name. And even the United Nations says in the Declaration of the Rights of the Child that a child has a right to a name and a nationality, which is interesting. And if I name a child, this is very important. Adam named things. So parents naming a child, that's a very beautiful thing, very beautiful. And the nice thing with the confirmation name is you choose this for yourself. You've already been given a name by your parents who love you, and now
certainly in the Old Testament we have where names were changed, right, and things like that.
Hugely important, isn't it?
Right.
Yes, and then when the Pope takes a new name, which at one level is very humble.
And even St. Peter, effectively.
Yeah,
too,
Simon, yes. So this is deep stuff. And I'd like people to get a little bit more interested and excited. And what I hope will happen is that confirmation classes will really go into some of this and also teach, for example, about a saint's day. It's the day you die. You're born into new life in heaven. A lot of kids don't know that. They somehow imagine the Pope sits there sucking the end of a pencil and saying, February the something.
I was looking at the calendar. We got an open date over here.
Yes, exactly.
We have an open date over here.
And it's sort of not that. And it's kind of fun to explain that because that makes the church come alive. And it's sort of interesting. I mean, it's a silly example perhaps, but St. George, patron of England and patron saint of our sovereign, he died on April the 23rd. That year happened to be Good Friday. So that's all bound up with the story of his martyrdom. You can imagine people at the time seeing a deep significance in this prominent Roman citizen, this soldier being dying publicly, executed on Good Friday. So your story, your date, all of this is very interesting. And we see this, I mean, wasn't it poignant that our beloved John Paul died on the eve of Divine Mercy Sunday? We can see a meaning in this. God is at charge here. And how nice to think of all the people that are called John Paul, a name which was unknown in my childhood.
Sure.
Nobody was called John Paul. And now there are lots of John Pauls who were born the year he was elected or the year he died. Or whatever. So all of this, your name resonates with history. And what a patron, what a wonderful patron to have. And I'm named after Joan of Arc, and I've always rather liked that. Although it worried me as a little girl, when I first learned about her, my parents told me that they chose the name because of Joan of Arc, and they'd seen the play by George Bernard Shaw.
Oh, St. Joan.
St. Joan. But the thing that really worried me was that she fought against us, the English. So how could she be right? And my mother explained, well, we weren't always in the right. Gosh, weren't we? Which was quite a teaching moment, you know. So your name is very important. It's very, very much more precious than
It was
we
those
thought.
Burgundians, anyway.
Yeah, well, exactly. They don't really count. It wasn't really the same.
the
Exactly.
English,
We were probably right. And in fact, my mother had of course, if the English had known,
Right,
it would have been
that's
quite different. Because we're always in the right.
That's
We're
right,
justice
right.
and fair play.
That's right.
It was always regarded as, yes.
He was the soldier who handed Joan the cross while she was burning.
Yes, that's it. That's
Right,
it, you
there you
see.
go.
So there you go. That's all right. He was English, of course. Yes.
Yes, of course he was.
Yes, of course. And indeed he was.
Right.
So
when you think about confirmation, now what you say in modern Britain, Catholics are usually confirmed about the age 10 or 11, and it still seems to be, even in the States, they keep talking about when it should be. And you also point out the idea, though, in the early church in a lot of ways, these were all done at the same time, baptism and confirmation.
yes, confirmation it seals our baptism, if you like. And that's still that way in the Eastern Church, isn't it? And there was one diocese in Britain which decided that because it is all beginning to drift as becoming a sort of teenage sacrament and all that, that it would be done before First Communion, in other words, the year before, when the children were sort of 7 and then First Communion at 8. And there's some value in that. I think actually I can see why it's good to do it at about 11 or a little after, because it fits into the scheme of your life. You are baptized, then you have, ideally, religious instruction, culminating in a year of preparation for First Communion. So that's that's good for parishes to do, good for catechists, good for Catholic schools.
Right.
Then the next landmark is confirmation. So it makes a structure to the child's religious formation. It's just easy. Even in the family, you can think, well, he must know this by his confirmation. So you can sort of build up to it. You know, those years are a time of learning. Whereas you cram it all into the early years. And I think there is a value in this idea that you're old enough now to understand the great value of this great sacrament, this gift from God. You know, the danger is becoming a sort of coming of age sacrament. That doesn't work. It's not that. It's an anointing from God. It's God's gift to us, not us to him in that sense.
Yeah, it's not like a bar mitzvah in that sense.
Just so it's not. I mean, there's exactly that. It's God's free gift to us. And then, in a sense, we must respond to that gift, like Mary at the Annunciation. But yeah, it's not a bar mitzvah, and we need to make that clear.
Right, and in some ways, I think in the United States, at least sometimes, it was seen as almost being the equivalent of a Protestant's personal commitment to Christ. Like, now your parents committed you, but now you're committing yourself.
That's right. I've heard that. We've had that in Britain too. And it's all the more annoying because, of course, there's an element of that. There's something in that, but it's not the essence of the sacrament at all. And in our parish, we had a lovely relationship with local Baptist church. They're good people. And they had a Baptist youth leader came to some of our confirmation preparation, just as a decent ecumenical goodwill. And I remember he was conscious that there was this difference. But I don't think it mattered. I think it was something that he learned. And yet he was impressed, I think, by the way we were training the boys and girls, and there were some 40 of them. It's a very good parish. So there's mutual learning, but in the end, this is a sacrament. It's God's gift to us. It's an anointing. It is not the young person making a yes in that sense.
Well, I was going to ask you, when you were confirmed, were you confirmed by the bishop?
Yes, and it's a good many years ago.
Now, did the bishop slap you?
Well, we were
or pat you?
Yes, we were always told.
When I was confirmed.
I was always told.
They don't do that, I don't think.
Well,
anymore,
they do. Yes, they do. But we
do?
were told that the folklore was he slapped you because it's a sign that you need to be able to withstand suffering.
Right.
But I remember being told at school, pre-Vatican II, no, it isn't. It's a sign of peace. It's
Really?
and they still do it, and it is a sign of peace. I was
because I always heard it the first one that was supposed to show that you might be
suffering for the faith.
Right.
I think there may have been an element of that, but I remember being told pre-Vatican II that it was not so. And when my niece was confirmed, and I was her sponsor a few years ago, I remember the bishop, it was more a caress. And I remember we had exactly this discussion at home, which is it? But essentially, it brought back memories of my own confirmation, but it was definitely more like this than this. But I remember because we too had this, he's going to smack you, but he didn't.
Right.
I mean, our bishop certainly wasn't going to.
Yeah.
And, most naughty little girls at some point know what it feels like to be smacked, although never on the face.
Right.
This was not a smack. I knew what that felt like.
It was a little pat.
It was a little
basically
pat.
a pat.
But it was something between a caress and so on. And I think the jury's still out. But I bet you confirmation candidates are still talking about it. Because they were in the last one I spoke to, the kids were saying, and he smacks your face.
And what was your confirmation name?
Mary. Maria, actually. And I didn't choose it because my mother simply said, I think every Catholic girl should have Mary in her name somewhere. And that made sense to me. So it wasn't a deeply personal choice. There was a suggestion from my mother, but I have no regrets. I'm pleased to
I
have
would
that.
say that, if you think about going to Catholic school, and I did, and I think about all the girls that I knew from school and who were in my age bracket, so many of them, either their first name was Mary or their middle name was Mary. A lot of Marys middle names.
That's true.
Joseph's my middle name.
That's
so that
it.
was very
That's
popular in the 50s and 60s here to have Mary or Joseph.
I remember that. And my
as your
sister's middle name was
baptismal name.
Mary, and my mother's middle name was Mary. I see nothing wrong in that. I think there's something very beautiful in that.
Well, I have had a very impactful decision when I decided what my confirmation name was going to be. I got to tell you, I was in 5th grade, and we had to pick a name. And there was no Googling available. So I was thinking, well, what name did I like? And I always liked the name Tom.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing there's some guy named Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas. That sounds kind of cool. That's a cool name. So I'm going to pick Thomas for Thomas Aquinas, which sounded very nice. I didn't know anything about Thomas Aquinas. And then I'm sitting there on my religious midterm exam in 5th grade, which when we were, and they ask you, tell us about the saint you've picked for confirmation. So I suddenly decided that Doubting Thomas was actually who I had picked, because I knew I could write about him and why it was important for me to have faith and not doubt. But originally it was Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, that's so funny.
But under pressure, I wilted.
Yes, I can imagine that. And there are some rather obscure saints that sometimes I'm asked about.
Which you've got in here, I'll tell you.
And sometimes it's a bit scary. They say, do you know about St. So-and-so? And the honest answer is no. But the correct answer for an adult is, I will find out.
Right. That's like your derivative of Abigail Gobnate?
Yes. I put that in because Abigail's a very popular name. It's a very now name, Abigail, a lot of Abigails. And it's a pretty name. But is there a saint? And when I looked her up, I discovered that the Irish version is Gobnate, which is a very ugly sound. Come along, Gobnate, it's time for tea. I can't quite see it.
Considering how many Irish names are so pretty and
pretty.
melodious.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And they're very popular, aren't they? The Celtic thing. But Gobnate was very early Irish church. And of course, Island of Saints. There's so many Irish saints. But yeah, Abigail is Gobnate. But I still go for Abigail. So,
Gobnate sounds like cognate. Sounds like
you're
doing something with your in your English language.
Yes.
Well, let me ask you this too, because you've got a bunch of ones in here. I mean, recently Kateri Tikawitha, obviously from this last year. Bakita, where we have a wonderful film we've been able to show on EWTN about Bakita. But there's other names in here where I would wonder, are these like saints in the sense of that these are the names of saints that the church has officially, or are some of them local kind of saints?
Some would be in a local calendar. These are all saints who are either canonized or beatified. They're blessed. Okay. And where blessed, I put that in. But some belong only to a local calendar. And that's one of the things I wanted to say, was that you might find, for example, I'm interested for obvious reasons in England, and you might find there are some wonderful old Saxon names like Etheldreda.
Yeah, right.
And again, the short version of that is Audrey.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
right.
Which is nice, giving us the word tawdry, because her shrine included tawdry things. That's where that comes from. So Ethelreda or Audrey or Dreda. She was an Anglo-Saxon princess, and of course the great shrine to her is at Ely, where the
daughter of King Anna of East Anglia,
which is the bit of England that sticks out into the North Sea, the bit furthest from America, as it were. And Ely Cathedral in Cambridgeshire, absolutely magnificent. You see it as you drive across the fens. I mean, what a wonderful saint. But I'm guessing that most people in America wouldn't know about her, and I don't think she's in the universal calendar. And then there are others like, I don't know, Hilda, as in Hilda of Whitby. And then there are people like, say, John Henry Newman. Now, he's just beatified, but what a saint, what a hero. And another thought I had about that
but
is
the idea of taking the name Newman even as opposed to John.
John, that's the point.
Okay.
Wouldn't that be nice, you see? After all, that is his name. And if it's John, well, there are so many. I mean, you know,
right,
John
so
of the
if you wanted
Cross.
something different,
Why
which
not?
most people seem to want today, to
Yes.
have it to be different or
Different.
unique, or if it's a general name, spell it differently.
That's it, I noticed
Right,
that.
spell it
Whether or not
differently.
this is a healthy thing, I don't know, but people are like that, so let's meet that. I've noticed that. So people, like poor Mrs. Clinton with Hillary with 2 L's in the middle, just to be a little bit different, you know. Yes, so why not be Newman? It's his name. And another example of that would be Edmund Campion. You could take Campion, which is rather nice.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, and that, again, that makes him different from Edmund of Abingdon and so on. Now, maybe people are a bit odd that they want to spell it differently or be different. Perhaps it's a curious trend. In 100 years, they'll say how odd that was. Right. Well, but you meet people where they are, and that's where they are. So I would find the idea of calling a child Campion, I mean, that's possible. It's also a white flower, wild white flower. But I would find that rather attractive. And I think you could stretch that too far, which you can get quite funny. And I did giggle doing the book because there were some saints that just sounded absurd. But I like the idea of something a bit different.
Did you include any of them in here?
1 or 2. Gobnate was one.
Gobnate was one.
And there were 1 or 2 others that just sounded, to me, funny. I mean, just sort of amusing.
Well, some of them just
Wahlburger would be another one.
Names that just because of where they came from. Even one of the Ugandan martyrs was Kizito.
Now, actually, it's a very popular name in Nigeria. The Ugandan martyrs, of course, are wonderful heroes because, among other things, they were teenage boys, and among other things, they refused to engage in homosexual activity with the king, the Kabaka. So these are real boy heroes for our day. But they were given Christian names before they were baptized, and so these were rather conventional names. The leading one is Charles Mwanga. But Kizito was only just newly a Christian, and he kept his original name. And Kizito is nice, and lots of little Nigerian boys are Kizito. And he was only about 14 when he went to his death, and they say he went dancing and singing because he was so joyful. And to me, what a story, you know. But it's an unusual name, but I think it works as a name,
well,
like Bakita, you know.
There's one here too, Tarcisius, where one of our brothers here at EWTN has that as his name. And the other ones like Linus, well, people here think of peanuts, but it also was really who supposedly was the second pope, right?
Yes, that's right, and we hear his name in the canon of the Mass, Linus Cletus Clement.
Well, we used to hear it all the time when I was a kid. You don't always hear Perpetua Agnus, all these names.
We hear it in the Roman canon
it's
now.
It's funny, if you go through here, sometimes the names pop out again.
Yes, you think, I know that one of
I remember that, because I remember that as a kid.
And then there are some saints about whom we know very little, and there was a clearing out of the calendar, and some were put only in a local calendar. St. George would be in that category. And then a country suddenly discovers they have a new saint that nobody had heard of, and an example of that would be Mary MacKillop in Australia. That's Mary, but she was beatified, a first native-born Australian saint, and her father came from Scotland, hence MacKillop, but she was actually born in Australia, in Pioneer Australia, and founded the sisters who did wonderful work founding all those schools out in the outback for the children of the settlers. So nobody would have heard of Mary MacKillop a few years ago. So you have to sort of clear the way for new saints. And I can see this sort of going on and on. It's a big adventure of life in the church.
Well, here's one. I'm going to let you pronounce it. The patron saint of the city of Oxford.
Friedersweed, yes. Well, she's the, in fact, Saxon again. You can hear that name, slightly Germanic name. And that's peace. Frida is peace, the same Germanic sound. And she's a patron of Oxford, and it said that she met a leper on the way and kissed him and embraced him. So she's, yes, and don't know anybody called that. But if you were confirmed at Oxford, that would be a nice choice of name, wouldn't it, you see?
Let's talk a little bit about, England and the ordinariate and things like that. Just basically, just in relation to this.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people will, and I remember when you were on Father Mitch, somebody talked about Protestantism, and you were indicating, well, Anglicans don't see themselves in the same vein because they have different traditions. And one of them would be the saints, right?
Yes. In fact, this booklet, for example, there would be many Anglican churches that would find this useful for christenings and so on. And it's not really useful to use the word Protestant in the in that same way, referring to the Anglican Communion. Now, the Ordinariate, this wonderful invitation from the Holy Father to Anglicans to come in as a group, inevitably it appealed to the Catholic-minded Anglicans, what we would say, high Anglicans. And there are certainly, and I have many very good friends among them, evangelical Anglicans who would be more Protestant, they, but they would tend to define themselves as evangelical. I think because it's a nicer term, they don't see themselves as protesting in the way that people did 400 years ago. And the other big point the Holy Father was making too about the Ordinariate is 400 years is a long time. These people are not consciously saying, we are not, absolutely, we hate the Catholic Church. It's more, well, we're Anglican, we have our tradition. You're born into a certain tradition. So although some of them may emphatically not be Catholic and not want to be, and that is absolutely clear, it defines, I'm not a Roman Catholic, that's fair enough, don't join. But there were others who would say, oh, we've always considered ourselves part of the worldwide church. Yes,
kind of the branch theory.
Yes, now they aren't. I mean, they just aren't, but they could be, So it's come on in. Let us take you from where you are to where you would really want to be and where you imagined wrongly that you were, but let's now do it. And I think the Ordinariate will work. It's small as yet, although not so small. They have 80 priests, which is the size of a small diocese, and they have all these groups. And they've now acquired 2 churches in London. Our bishops have given them. So, this is a new chapter opening. Whether or not it will all gain rapid speed, the jury's out. I'm guessing the Anglican Church will be with us for a while yet. And then you have these evangelicals who, and I'm thinking of particular friends here, who'll say, no, Joanna, I just don't think the Roman Church is right about this or that or the other. So that is where Marcus Grodi and people can meet them and say, right, let's talk. And perhaps let's just disagree at the moment. There we are. But the ones who believe what the Catholic Church believes or want to believe it or feel they ought to be part of it, there is now a way they can do this while bringing certain Anglican traditions, including even the names they give their children, a certain English tradition, the way they sing, evensong, nice hymns. I think it's all going to be beautiful.
Right, just before we go, another book in the works for you?
Yes. I was just the other day emailing my publisher. This one is going to be fun. I'm planning to go to Krakow with a girlfriend. I've been a few times. This is a return trip. We want to walk in the footsteps of John Paul, and there's a particular aspect of his life, his spiritual life, that we want to explore. And I'm going to write this with Claire. So that's the idea, and it will be quite tough going, but we'll email back and forth. That's the next book. I think that having John Paul as our Pope, for me this was the formative years of my life, in my early married life and so on. Jamie and I, he's our Pope. He gave us a signed Bible when Jamie had an audience with him after a big pro-life project. I want to pay my own personal tribute to John Paul. That's the next thing.
Well, you're doing a good job. Thank you for the work you're doing here at EWTN and your blogs and all your other support for the church in England and around the world. Thank you so much, Joanna.
Thank you.
Speaking here with the one and only Joanna Bogle about her book, Saints and Patrons, Christian Names for Baptism and Confirmation. It's available through the Catholic Truth Society. You can also check out Joanna's website. I'm Doug Keck. Join us next time right here on EWTN's Book.